Ready for a trip back in time? Today we're diving into the heart of China's education system, but with a twist. We're not just talking textbooks and exams, we're talking about the lives of the people who lived through it, their dreams, their struggles, all set against the backdrop of China's crazy transformation over the past few decades.
And what makes this deep dive so fascinating is our guide, Peter Hessler. He's not just some outsider looking in, he actually taught in China.
Exactly. And not just once, but twice, decades apart. So we get this incredible before and after picture of how much changed, but also what stayed surprisingly the same.
And he's a great storyteller. He paints these vivid pictures with his words. You almost feel like you're right there with him.
Totally. So first up, 1990s, a small city called Fuling. Think pre-skyscrapers, pre-bullet trains, when most of China was still rural.
And this is where Hessler first goes to teach English, fresh out of college himself.
Can you imagine? Showing up in this completely different world, trying to teach about, I don't know, Shakespeare or something.
Well, he actually describes preparing his students for a Long March singing contest. Remember those iconic scenes from old Chinese films? They actually had to find English songs about the Long March, which, as you can imagine,
wasn't exactly topping the charts back then.
Exactly. And that kind of sums up the whole era, this mix of revolutionary history crashing into the modern world.
And trying to learn English in the middle of it all? Hessler talks about how basic the college was, no heating, bare concrete floors.
He even mentions students being suspicious of him at first, this American showing up in their classroom. It's like they were being given a glimpse of a world they could barely imagine.
I can only imagine what those first conversations must have been like. How do you even begin to bridge that cultural divide?
Well, that's what's so powerful about Hessler's book. He doesn't just tell us about it, he shows us through the individual stories of his students. Like Emily, this sharp, opinionated young woman who wasn't afraid to challenge him.
She sounds fascinating.
Oh, she is. And her story really encapsulates the changes happening in China at the time. Instead of becoming a teacher, which is what most people expected, she goes to work for her cousin in Kunming.
So chasing new opportunities, that entrepreneurial spirit we hear so much about.
Exactly. But at the same time, she's still deeply connected to her family, sending money back home, navigating those traditional obligations.
It's like this push and pull between the old and the new, right?
Yeah.
Tradition versus ambition, family ties versus individual dreams.
And that tension, that's what makes this era so fascinating to explore. It's like the whole country was trying to figure out its place in the world.
Okay, so picture this. It's now 20 years later, and Hessler goes back to China to teach again. But this time, it's a whole different ballgame, right?
Totally. He's now at Sichuan University, one of the top schools in the country. No more bare bones classrooms.
Yeah, I bet. No more Long March sing-alongs either, I'm guessing.
Not quite. But seriously, the whole vibe is different. He goes from teaching students who are starved for information about the outside world to students who are totally plugged in, up on all the latest trends. They're fluent in internet culture, but also facing a whole new kind of pressure.
Because now it's all about the Gaokao.
Right.
Those insane college entrance exams everyone talks about.
Exactly. It's like this all-consuming force that looms over everything. Hessler even talks about this term involution, which I think perfectly captures the experience of these students.
Involution? That sounds kind of ominous.
It is. It's basically this idea that everyone's working harder and harder, but no one's really getting ahead. They're trapped in this endless cycle of competition.
And the Gaokao is the ultimate example of that.
Totally. They spend their whole lives prepping for this one exam that feels like it'll determine their entire future. It's a lot of pressure.
No kidding. It's they have all these opportunities, but at what cost, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. And Hessler illustrates this perfectly with this one anecdote about a student who wants to write about their VPN dealer for a project.
Wait, their VPN dealer?
Yeah. So VPNs are a big deal in China because so much of the internet is blocked. And to get around those blocks, people use VPNs.
Oh, right. To access websites that the government doesn't want them to see.
Exactly. So these VPN dealers, they're like digital smugglers, providing access to this whole other world of information.
And a student wants to write about that.
Yeah.
That's kind of cool, actually. Shows how much the world has changed, right?
Totally. But it also shows that even with all the restrictions, these students are still curious, still finding ways to explore and think for themselves.
I guess is a good sign, right? But I have a feeling it's not all sunshine and roses. I mean, we know how strict the government is, especially under Xi Jinping.
You're right. The political climate definitely casts a shadow on everything. And as Hessler soon discovers, even seemingly harmless actions can have serious consequences.
it's kind of wild to think about these students growing up in a China that's like exploding with technology and opportunity, but at the same time, still facing these limits on what they can say, what they can access online.
It's a constant balancing act, right, between progress and control. And Hessler really brings this to life with the story of Common Sense, this underground student publication he stumbles upon at Sichuan University.
Underground publication. Okay, now that sounds intriguing.
Right. It's like this little pocket of resistance within this prestigious university. And they're not just like messing around, they're publishing serious stuff. Investigative journalism, social commentary, even critiques of the government.
Wow. But how do they get away with that? I mean, we're talking about China, right?
That's the thing. They had to be super careful. Like, they used code words, held secret meetings, the whole 9 yards. And even then, there was always this risk, this awareness that they were being watched.
It's almost like they're living double lives, right? There's like tech-savvy students by day, and then by night they're like...
digital dissidents.
Exactly. Which, I mean, it takes guts to do that, to put yourself out there like that, knowing the potential consequences.
Absolutely. And it shows how hungry they were for a space to share their ideas, to challenge the official narrative. Like, one student even wrote that it's the media's job to report on things governments want to hide.
Wow. I can't imagine hearing something like that back in Hessler's Falling Classroom in the 90s.
Right. It shows how much the boundaries of what's acceptable to say, to even think, have shifted in some ways, though as Hessler learns firsthand, those boundaries are still very much there.
Oh, right. He mentions this incident where his wife, Leslie, is giving a lecture, and what was it she said again?
She mentions Taiwan.
Right, Taiwan.
And one of Hessler's students ends up getting investigated because of it.
Seriously? Just for mentioning Taiwan?
That's all it took.
Wow. It's like 1 minute you're having a normal conversation and the next...
walls close in.
Exactly. So like, how do you even function in that kind of environment, knowing that someone's always listening, always watching?
It's a question a lot of people inside China are grappling with. And it's something we see reflected in the paths Hessler's students take after graduation.
Because, of course, it's not just about what happens in the classroom. It's about how all of this, the education, the politics, the economic boom, how it all shapes their lives, their choices, their dreams.
Exactly. Like, take Youngsi, for example. He becomes this wildly successful businessman, the epitome of China's economic miracle. But in the process of chasing that success, he loses his girlfriend.
The classic trade-off, love versus ambition.
Right. And then there's Emily's cousin, who goes from digging ditches to becoming a wealthy developer, but still feels this sense of emptiness.
It's like, even when you achieve the so-called Chinese dream, it doesn't always guarantee happiness, right?
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, what's the point of all this progress if it comes at the expense of personal fulfillment, of genuine connection?
Right. And it's not like everyone's winning in this new China either. Hessler doesn't shy away from that. He talks about students like Willie, whose brother gets injured in a factory accident, a reminder that
progress often has a human cost.
Yeah. And it makes you realize that there are so many different sides to this story, so many different experiences of what it means to be young and ambitious in today's China.
And that's the beauty of Hessler's book. He doesn't offer any easy answers. He just presents these stories, these glimpses into people's lives, and lets you draw your own conclusions.
It's like he's holding up a mirror to this complex, rapidly changing society and saying, look closer.
And that's what makes this deep dive so rewarding, right? It's not about finding all the answers, it's about asking the right questions. It's about getting a glimpse into a world that's both familiar and utterly foreign, and realizing that in many ways it's a reflection of our own.
Well said. And for anyone listening who's feeling like even the slightest bit curious about China, about its education system, about the lives of the people who live there, I can't recommend Peter Hessler's Other Rivers enough. It's one of those books that will stay with you long after you finish it.